Some folks believe a heart breaks all at once, like ice under a wagon wheel. But most hearts break slowly, in small cold rooms, while a person keeps doing the work expected of them. On the prairie, love did not always arrive wearing a clean coat or carrying a promise. Sometimes it came with soot on its hands, a wrench in a carpet bag, and the courage to kneel beside a broken stove while children watched their breath fog the air. Hank Callahan crossed the schoolyard at a run, his boots punching through a crust of old snow, one arm full of split cottonwood, and the other clutching the iron stove door that had come loose in his hand. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of Mercy Ridge, Dakota Territory, its clapboard walls silvered by wind, its windows filmed with frost, and its bell rope stiff as a frozen snake. Inside, 12 children huddled in coats and mittens around a black pot-belly stove that had gone cold before lessons began, while Miss Ruth Bell pressed her shawl over a little boy's shaking shoulders. The stove was the heart of that schoolhouse, and that morning its heart had failed. Hank dropped the wood near the door and stared at the cracked firebox, the warped hinge, the missing damper chain, and the small crescent-shaped brass stove key hanging from a nail beside the slate board. Old Mr. Abel had kept that key tied to his vest for 30 years, polishing it every Friday after banking the school fire. Now, it swung uselessly in the draft, bright as a coin no one could spend. "I sent for a stove man," Hank said, though his voice did not carry much confidence. Miss Bell looked up from the children. "You sent 3 days ago." "I sent again." A gust rattled the windows, and little Caleb Price coughed so hard his sister pulled him against her coat. "Before we go farther, tell me where you are watching from tonight. If this story touches something quiet in you, like, share, and subscribe, and come sit with us a while. There is room by the stove for every lonely heart." By noon, every shopkeeper in Mercy Ridge knew the schoolhouse stove had quit, and every mother knew Hank Callahan had promised to fix what no one else could. That was how things went in a town small enough for smoke to be news and debt to have a voice. Hank was not the schoolmaster, nor the ale, nor the church deacon. He was a cattleman with 46 winter-thin steers, a mortgage that slept under his pillow, and a reputation for taking responsibilities he had no room to carry. He had taken the schoolhouse on because his late wife, Anna, had once taught there before fever took her in April. She had painted the alphabet border herself, blue letters on cream cloth, and sewn curtains from feed sacks when the town treasury ran dry. After she died, Hank could not bear to see the place neglected. He chopped wood for it, repaired its steps, mended the gate when boys swung on it. And every morning before riding his fence line, he stepped inside, checked the stove, and lit the fire so the children would not learn their letters with blue fingers. But a broken firebox was more than kindling and muscle. That afternoon, he stood in the mercantile beneath hanging harness and bunches of dried beans, while Mr. Leland Voss, the storekeeper, counted nails as if each one had a court date. "No stoveman in Deadwood till spring," Voss said. "One in Bismarck, my BB, if you pay his rail and his board. There's a foundry man out of Yankton, but he won't come for less than $20. $20? Voss raised one eyebrow. "Wow, warmth costs more in winter." Hank placed both hands on the counter. His knuckles were split from cold and work. "Put outward. Anybody who can repair cast iron. Anybody who knows dampers, hinges, pipe draft, anything." Voss leaned closer. "You got money for anybody?" Hank did not answer. The store went quiet in that sharp way stores do when people pretend not to listen. Mrs. Dovey Price was selecting thread near the back shelf. 2 ranch hands from the double bar were buying tobacco by the stove. A girl with a basket of eggs stopped breathing with her eyes wide open. Voss's mouth curved. "Mercer Bank already holds your note, Hank. You go adding more promises to your name. Folks might start asking how much that name is worth." Hank's jaw worked once. The bell over the mercantile door rang. Cold air swept in, carrying fine snow and the smell of iron rails. A young woman stepped through it wearing a dark green traveling coat, its hem dusted white, and a brown bonnet tied beneath her chin. She carried a leather carpetbag in one hand and a narrow wooden tool case in the other. Not a lady's fancy box, a workman's case, scarred at the corners, with a brass latch shaped like a leaf. Every eye in the store turned. The woman shut the door behind her, looked once around the room, and said, "I was told someone here needed a schoolhouse stove repaired." Voss blinked. "You were told?" "8 terms. The depot." She set the wooden case on the counter. A freight clerk said a man named Hank Callahan had asked after a stove mechanic. Hank stared at her gloves. They were good gloves, kid leather, but the fingertips were darkened with old soot. "I'm Hank Callahan," he said slowly. She turned toward him. Her face was pale from travel, her cheeks cut pink by the cold, and her eyes had the steady gray color of winter water under ice. "Coraline Mercer," she said. The name struck the store harder than the wind had. Mercer, the banker's daughter. Even the beams hanging from the rafters seemed to hold still. Voss made a sound between a laugh and a cough. "Miss Mercer, surely you are not here to fix a stove." Coraline looked at him for one quiet second. "Surely I am." Hank knew Gideon Mercer by sight and by signature. Every month, he walked into Mercer Bank, removed his hat, and stood before the mahogany desk where Gideon's gold watch ticked beside ledgers full of men's failures. Gideon Mercer had bought half the notes in Mercy Ridge after the hard winter of '85, and had never once raised his voice while taking what men loved. His daughter was said to have been educated back east, promised to a railroad investor, and kept above ordinary dust. Yet here she stood with a tool case. Hank picked up his hat from the counter. "School's this way." Voss laughed then. "Callahan, you can't be serious." Hank looked at Coraline. "Can you fix it?" "I can look at it. That is more than anybody else has done." The walk to the schoolhouse was silent at first. Snow whispered across the frozen ruts. Coraline kept pace without complaint, though her boots were too fine for the road, and her carpetbag knocked against her skirt. Hank carried the tool case after she allowed him to take it, but she kept the carpetbag herself. "You came alone?" he asked. "Yes." "From where?" "Bismarck, this morning. By rail to the Mercy Ridge stop. That is no short ride now." He waited for more, but none came. At the schoolhouse, Miss Bell met them at the door, worry in every line of her face. She looked from Hank to Coraline, then to the tool case. "This is Miss Mercer," Hank said. "She came about the stove." The children had been moved to the church hall, but the room still held their presence in chalk dust, slates stacked crookedly, lunch pails left beneath benches, and 12 pairs of small footprints melted into mud near the door. The cold had settled low and mean. Ink had thickened in its bottle on Miss Bell's desk. Coraline removed her bonnet, hung it carefully on the wall peg, and crossed to the stove. She did not flutter or ask for a man to open the door. She knelt on the worn floorboards, pulled off her gloves, and ran her bare fingers along the cracked iron seam. Hank noticed her hands then, not soft, not idle. The nails were clean, but cut short. A faint white scar crossed the base of her thumb. Soot lived in the lines of her skin, as if it had been there before that day. "Who fired it last?" she asked. "I did," Hank said. "With green wood." He felt his face warm. "Some dry pile ran low." She nodded but did not scold. "And the damper chain snapped last week. I worked it with a nail." Her fingers paused. "That explains the warped hinge." Miss Bell pressed a hand to her mouth. Hank wished for a hole in the floor. Caroline did not look at him. She opened her tool case. Inside, each tool had its place, held in loops of stitched canvas. Small wrench, cold chisel, awl, hinge pins, a tin of black stove cement, a length of chain, a wire brush, a folded piece of wall, and a little oil bottle wrapped in cloth. Tucked into the lid was a narrow ivory ruler and a flat oval mirror cracked across one corner. Hank had seen cowboys unpack pistols with less care. Coraline studied the stovepipe next. Can you climb? Yes. Then I'll need you on the roof when I ask. There might be soot fall. I've had worse fall on me. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Most men say that before they cough. Miss Bell gave a soft laugh, surprised out of herself. For the next hour, Coraline worked as if the room had always belonged to her hands. She loosened bolts that had not moved in years, brushed rust from the hinge, mixed stove cement on a broken slate, and set Hank to straightening the stovepipe while she cleaned the draft. Once, when he reached for the wrong tool, she said, "Not that one," without looking up, and he withdrew his hand like a schoolboy. Children began pressing their faces to the outside windows, breath-making moons on the glass. Word had spread. Coraline ignored the watchers. Hank did not. He saw Voss standing near the gate, talking with two women from the church. He saw Sheriff Abel Dunn ride by slow, then slow again. He saw a black buggy stop near the livery, and for a moment his stomach tightened because Mercer Bank owned a black buggy with polished lamps. But it was not Gideon Mercer, not yet. At dusk, Coraline hooked the new damper chain to the little crescent brass stove key. "Who made this?" she asked. "Old Abel Price, Caleb's grandfather. He was blacksmith before the fever took his lungs. It's beautiful. It opens a stove. Miss Mercer, useful things can be beautiful." She said it so plainly that Hank had no answer. When the fire finally took, it did so with a low, grateful roar. Warmth rolled out across the schoolhouse floor. Frost thinned on the windows. Miss Bell closed her eyes as if someone had lifted a sack from her back. Outside, the children cheered. Coraline sat back on her heels. A smudge of soot ran along her cheekbone. Her hair, loosened from its pins, curled darkly near her ear. She reached up and touched the brass stove key once to test the damper's pull. "There," she said. "It will hold for now." "For now?" Hank asked. "The firebox is cracked deeper than I like. I patched it. It needs a proper plate before hard weather sets again. Hard weather is already here." She looked out the window at the gray evening and the children jumping in the schoolyard. "Then we should not waste time." Hank heard the word "we" and felt something in his chest move against its own will. Miss Bell insisted Coraline come to the teacher's room for tea, but Coraline's face had gone drawn with fatigue. She had been on a train since before dawn, then walked through snow, then worked on iron in a freezing room for hours. Still, when Hank offered to carry her bags to the hotel, she stiffened. "I can manage. The hotel's full on account of the cattle auction," Miss Bell said gently. "Mrs. Bellamy has 3 drovers in her parlor and 2 in the washroom." Caroline's hand tightened around her carpet bag. Hank saw it then, not pride alone, fear. The quick hidden sort that showed only in fingers. "There's a room at my place," he said before sense could stop him. Miss Bell looked at him. Coraline looked at the floor. Outside, Voss watched through the window. Hank cleared his throat. "My housekeeper left after my wife passed. There's a spare room. Door has a bolt. Miss Bell can ride out and see it if propriety needs a witness." Miss Bell's eyes softened. "I know Hank Callahan's house." Caroline did not speak. "You fixed the school stove," Hank said. "Town owes you lodging at least." "Does the town know that?" Caroline asked. "No," he said, "but I do." That decided it. Though not easily, Miss Bell packed bread, cheese, and a jar of apple butter into a cloth bundle. Hank hitched the wagon beneath a sky like hammered tin. Coraline climbed in with her tool case on her lap and her carpet bag at her feet, sitting stiffly as if expecting every board of the town to accuse her. Mercy Rich did not disappoint. Curtains shifted. Men outside the saloon paused with glasses in hand. A woman at the church gate turned her daughter's face away. Voss stood under the mercantile awning, smiling like he had found a gold vein in somebody else's grave. Hank gathered the reins. Coraline said quietly, "You will hear about this. I've heard worse. I might be the worse." The words were so soft he almost missed them. He looked at her then, but she had turned her face toward the prairie, where snow moved low across the road like breath from an unseen herd. The Callahan place sat 3 miles beyond town in a shallow fold of prairie, with cottonwoods along the frozen creek and a barn leaning shoulder first into the wind. The house had once been painted white. Now the boards were weather gray, the porch sagged at one corner, and the kitchen window glowed with the small lamp Hank had left burning in hope he would return before full dark. A yellow dog came limping from beneath the steps, tail wagging slow. "That Bishop?" Hank said. "He barks at saints and sleeps through thieves." Coraline lowered her hand. Bishop sniffed her glove, then leaned against her skirt as if they had met before and simply forgotten. Inside, the house smelled of coffee, old ashes, leather, and loneliness. Hank had thought it clean enough. He saw it now through her silence. A coat over the back of a chair, dishes rinsed but not dried, flour spilled white in the corner where mice had chewed the sack, a woman's blue shawl folded on a peg near the bedroom door, untouched long enough to gather dust. Coraline noticed the shawl. She looked away quickly. "The spare room is here," Hank said. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, one quilt, and a trunk with a broken latch. Anna's sewing basket sat in the corner. Hank stepped in and took it up awkwardly. "I should have moved that." "Leave it," Coraline said. "Unless it pains you." "Everything pains me," he almost said. Instead, he set the basket back. Supper was bread, cheese, beans warmed over, and coffee too strong. Coraline ate as if measuring hunger against manners. Hank pretended not to notice how she scraped the last smear of apple butter from the plate with a careful corner of bread. "You learned stove work back east?" he asked. "My mother's father owned a repair shop in Pennsylvania before he died. Stoves, ranges, lamps, boiler fittings. I spent summers there as a girl. Your father allowed that. My father did not notice until I could repair his office heater faster than the man he paid." Hank almost smiled. She lifted her cup with both hands, warming her fingers. "After my mother died, he noticed everything." The room settled. Bishop sighed near the stove. Hank looked at the blue shawl on the peg. "Death does that to a house." Coraline's eyes found his, then fell. Yes, that was all. But it was not little. The next morning Coraline was up before him. Hank came into the kitchen to find coffee already set on the stove, the ashes cleared, and a small row of tools laid on the table on a folded cloth. She wore a plain brown dress now, one that had been packed tight and shaken out without ironing. Her hair was pinned simply. The rich banker's daughter had vanished, and in her place stood a woman with rolled sleeves studying a warped stoveplate by lamplight. "You should have slept," he said. "I did not enough." She gave him a glance. "Do cowmen measure sleep now? Only when somebody else is short of it." The corner of her mouth moved. "I need scrap iron for the school stove, and a better length of chain, and firebrick, if any remains from the old smithy." "You mean to start today?" I mean to finish before those children lose another morning." He poured coffee, found it better than his, and drank without comment. They rode to the old smithy after breakfast. Snow had stopped, leaving the world hard and bright. Coraline sat beside him in the wagon with a wool scarf wrapped close, her tool case between her boots. She did not feel quiet for comfort. Hank found himself grateful and unsettled by it. At the smithy, she searched the rusted iron with sharp attention. She found a stoveplate from an abandoned cook range, tapped it with a hammer, listened to the ring, rejected 2 pieces, chose one, and had Hank load it into the wagon. "You hear something different?" he asked. "In iron?" "Yes. What does good iron say?" She brushed snow from the plate. "That it is tired but willing." He laughed once, unexpected, and the sound startled a crow from the roof. She looked at him, and for the first time her face opened fully. Not a smile of charm, a smile of relief, brief as sun between clouds. Then hoofbeats sounded on the road. Gideon Mercer's black buggy came around the bend with its polished lamps and high wheels. The horse was matched and fine, its harness silver trimmed. Hank's laughter died. Coraline stood very still. The buggy stopped. Gideon Mercer stepped down wearing a dark wool coat, black gloves, and the expression of a man who had never apologized to weather. He was tall, iron gray at the temples, with eyes the same color as his daughter's, but none of the warmth. Coraline. She did not move toward him. Father, I have spent a day and a half following rumors, unfit to repeat. Then don't repeat them. His gaze cut to Hank Callahan. Hank removed his hat. Mr. Mercer, my daughter will return with me. Coraline's chin lifted. No. The word landed clean. Gideon's face did not change, which somehow made it worse. You left Bismarck without permission. You broke an engagement dinner. You took tools from my carriage house and answered a labor notice like a hired mechanic. I took my grandfather's tools, she said. You have embarrassed your name. My name has survived worse than honest work. Hank looked at her then. Gideon stepped closer. You do not understand what is at stake. I understand perfectly. No. You understand stoves and childish defiance. You do not understand banks, contracts, family position, or the cruelty of gossip. Coraline's hand rested on the wooden tool case. I understand cruelty. A muscle moved in Gideon's jaw. He turned to Hank. Whatever she has promised you, whatever fancy has taken hold here, it ends now. Your note is due in March. I would not advise making an enemy of the man who holds it. Hank felt the old shame rise, hot and bitter. Debt had a way of making a man feel stripped, even when fully clothed. He had borrowed for feed, then medicine, then burial. Each signature had seemed necessary. Each month after, the note had grown heavier. Coraline stared at her father. Do not threaten him because you cannot command me. I command what carries my name. Then perhaps I should stop carrying it. For the first time, Gideon Mercer looked struck. Hank stepped between them before anger sharpened into something neither could call back. Miss Mercer came to repair the school stove. That's all? Gideon's eyes narrowed. Is it? Hank held his gaze. It is enough. The banker looked past him to his daughter. Your room at the hotel has been paid for. You will stay there tonight. Tomorrow you will return east. I have work. You have obligations. I know. The way she said it made Hank wonder what obligation had brought her here, and what one she had run from. Gideon returned to his buggy without another word. The horse pulled away in a fine spray of snow, black wheels cutting the road clean. Coraline stood until the buggy vanished. Hank picked up the scrap plate. You should have told me he was coming. I didn't know. You should have told me there was an engagement dinner. Her cheeks whitened. He hated himself for saying it. It was not my engagement, she said after a moment. Not in any way that matters. He thinks otherwise. My father thinks signatures make truth. Hank placed the iron in the wagon bed. Sometimes they do. She looked at him. Ah, yes, that what your bank note is. Truth? He had no answer. They worked side by side at the schoolhouse all afternoon. Neither mentioned Gideon Mercer. The children returned to lessons with their coats open at last, and warmth made them noisy. Miss Bell had them recite spelling while Coraline measured the patch plate. Hank stood on a ladder, holding the stovepipe while soot drifted into his hair. A boy named Jonah whispered, Mr. Callahan looks like a chimney sweep. Hank said from the ladder, a chimney sweep with ears. The children smothered laughter. Coraline did not look up, but her shoulders moved once. By evening the new plate was fitted. Coraline used the crescent brass key to test the draft again and again, listening to the fire respond. The stove breathed better now, steady and deep. Caleb Price approached her when the others were gathering slates. My hands didn't hurt today, he said. Coraline knelt to his height. Then the stove did its duty. He looked at the brass key. Grandpa made that. Mama says he put a moon in it, so the school would have light even at night. Coraline's face softened. Your grandpa understood beautiful things. Caleb nodded solemnly, then offered her a peppermint stick wrapped in paper. It was likely all he owned worth giving. She accepted it as if it were a medal. That night, Coraline did not go to the hotel. Hank did not ask why when she climbed into the wagon after Miss Bell had gone. He only tucked a lap robe over her knees and turned the horses toward the prairie. In town, the hotel lamps glowed yellow. Gideon Mercer's buggy stood outside. Coraline looked at it once and then looked away. At the ranch, she made herself useful with a determination that bordered on punishment. She swept the kitchen, patched Hank's torn work glove, sorted the firewood by dryness, and set beans to soak without asking where anything was. Hank fed the horses, milked the one stubborn cow, and returned to find the blue shawl taken from the peg, shaken clean, and folded on the rocking chair instead of hanging like a ghost. He stopped in the doorway. Coraline looked up from the table. I'm sorry, it had dust. He stared at the shawl. Anna had worn it during her last winter, wrapped tight around shoulders that grew thinner by the week. After she died, Hank had hung it where she always left it. Months passed, then a year, then nearly 2. He had dusted around it, moved around it, lived around it, as if grief were a piece of furniture too heavy to lift. Coraline reached for the shawl. I'll put it back. No. His voice came rough. She withdrew her hand. He crossed the room slowly, touched the folded wall, and sat in the chair beside it. The house ticked in the cold. The stove popped softly. She used to wear it when she graded lessons, he said. Coraline stood very still. She taught half those children their letters, said the school stove was cantankerous but loyal. A faint smile touched Coraline's mouth. That sounds like most good stoves. She wanted children. He rubbed his palms over his knees. We lost 2 before they had names. Then fever took her before we could try again. Coraline's eyes shone in the lamplight, but she did not come closer, did not touch him, did not offer the easy words people used to cover discomfort. At last she said, my mother died in a room full of polished furniture. Hank looked up. I was 17. Father sent for doctors, ice, flowers, anything money could fetch. But she kept asking for her father's old shop apron. It smelled of coal smoke and lemon oil. He refused to bring it because he thought it beneath her. Coraline looked toward her tool case. After she died, I found it in a trunk. She had kept it folded under tissue paper for 20 years. Silence stretched between them, not empty now, but shared. Hank said, that why you kept the tools? Yes, and why you fixed stoves? She looked at the fire. Because rooms should be warm when people are hurting. The line entered him quietly and stayed. Days took on a rhythm after that. At dawn, Hank brought in wood and found coffee waiting, not always hot, but always there. Coraline mended the school stove each morning until she trusted it, then turned her attention to smaller things that had gone unfixed too long. A loose porch board, a broken hinge on the pantry, a kettle handle wrapped with wire. She did not ask permission for every mercy. She simply saw what needed doing and did it. Hank pretended to object when she reorganized the tool shelf in the barn. Can't find a blessed thing now, he said. She pointed without looking. Fence staples, second tin, harness, all, left peg. Hoof rasp below the lantern. He found each one exactly where she said. He said. Yourself. Bishop followed her everywhere. At first Hank thought it was because she slipped him crusts. Then he realized she spoke to the dog as if he were a person with burdens. Bishop, being wise, accepted this promotion. Mercy Ridge talked. Of course it talked. The church women came by in pairs, bringing preserves and questions wrapped in concern. Coraline received them on the porch with her sleeves rolled down and her posture straight. She thanked them for the jars, answered nothing she did not wish to answer, and returned to scraping rust from the old school stove door after they left. Mrs. Dovey Price defended her first and loudly after Caleb came home with warm hands. Let them whisper, Dovey said in the Mercantile. My boy can hold a pencil again because that woman knew what the men did not, Ross replied. A banker's daughter kneeling in soot is still a strange sight. Dovey snapped thread between her teeth. So is a storekeeper selling flour dearer in a hungry month. But here we are. The story traveled. Gideon Mercer remained in town. He rented the best room at the hotel and sent 2 notes to the Callahan Ranch. Coraline burned the first unopened. She opened the second at the kitchen table, read it once, and folded it with hands that did not tremble until she thought Hank had turned away. He had not. Bad news? He asked. Expected news. Horse. She placed the letter beneath her cup. He says Mr. Leander Fitch will arrive by the Sunday train. Who is Fitch? The man my father wants me to marry. Hank set down the harness buckle he was repairing. Coraline kept her eyes on the letter. He invests in railroad land. He is widowed. He is 43. He says practical women are rare. How old are you? 26. The buckle dug into Hank's palm. She gave a small, humorless smile. You are calculating whether you have any right to be angry. No, he said. She looked up. I already know I don't. That hurt more than anger would have. He saw it and wished again for better words. Coraline rose and took the cups to the basin. I left because my father planned to announce the engagement at supper. I had refused in private. He decided public pressure might improve my obedience. And the stove notice? I saw it on the depot board in Bismarck. Schoolhouse stove broken. Children cold. Need repair urgent. Ask for Hank Callahan, Mercy Ridge. She looked out the window toward the dim line of town. It sounded honest. Desperate, but honest. I thought one honest thing might save me from a room full of lies. Hank stood slowly. Did it? She turned back to him. The lamplight caught the soot still faintly beneath one fingernail. I don't know yet, she said. Sunday came blue and cold. Hank shaved badly, cut his chin, cursed under his breath, and then apologized because Coraline was in the next room. I have heard worse language from a bank president balancing a ledger, she called. He pressed a towel to his chin and smiled despite himself. They rode to church together because not riding together would have been a lie the whole town could see through. Coraline wore her green traveling coat and a plain bonnet. Hank wore his dark suit, the shoulders a little tight from years of work. At the schoolhouse, smoke rose steady from the chimney. The sight eased something in both of them. Church was full. The sermon was on charity, which made Hank stare hard at the floor. Coraline sang softly from the hymnal, her voice lower than he expected, and steady enough until the last verse. When the service ended, people gathered outside under a pale sun, pretending not to wait for the Sunday train. The whistle came just as Sheriff Dunn was telling a story about a mule that stole biscuits. Everyone turned. The train slowed at the depot in a cloud of steam. A man stepped down in a fur-collared coat, carrying a silver-topped cane. He had a handsome face carefully arranged to look kind. Behind him, Gideon Mercer descended from the platform, having gone to meet him. Leander Fitch walked toward the church with his hat in hand, smiling at Mercy Ridge, as though it were a property he might consider purchasing. Miss Mercer, he called warmly. Coraline stood beside Hank and did not move. Fitch bowed. Your father has been worried beyond measure. My father worries most when his plans are delayed. The smile flickered, then returned, still spirited. I always admired that. Hank disliked him with unreasonable speed. Gideon approached. Coraline, enough spectacle. She kept her voice low. Then, do not make one. Fitch looked at Hank as though noticing a hired hand near a parlor rug. Mr. Callahan, is it? I appreciate whatever assistance you have provided during Miss Mercer's confusion. Hank's hands curled once. Coraline said, I am not confused. Fitch sighed with practiced patience. My dear, a woman fleeing her family to lodge with a debtor rancher does not appear entirely settled. There it was. A sound moved through the churchyard, half gasp, half hunger. Hank stepped forward. You'll speak careful. Fitch lifted his brows. Or, Sheriff Dunn shifted near the gate. Gideon watched, unreadable. Coraline touched Hank's sleeve, not to restrain him, to remind him he was not alone. She faced Fitch. I came to repair a stove. I stayed because I chose to. If you find skill shameful, Mr. Fitch, that is your poverty, not mine. A few women lowered their eyes. Miss Bell smiled faintly. Fitz's mouth hardened. Your father and I have arranged matters that cannot be undone by a dramatic week in cow country. My life is not a ledger entry, Gideon said. Everything is in time. Hank looked at the banker then, and felt the old debt collar tighten around his throat. Fitch turned to the crowd. I believe Miss Mercer has been influenced during a vulnerable spell. Out of respect for her late mother, we will not discuss it further here. It was clever, kind-sounding, cruel as wire. Caroline went very still. Hank saw the blow land where no one else would. Her mother had been invoked like property. Hank removed Coraline's hand from his sleeve gently, then walked to the schoolhouse gate. Beside it hung the little crescent brass stove key, moved there by Caleb Price, on a ribbon so Miss Bell could open the damper without searching. Hank took it down. He returned and held it out in his palm. This key was made by a blacksmith who died poor, he said, not loud, but the yard quieted. It keeps that school warm because Miss Mercer knew how to use it. Not because of her father's name, not because of Mr. Fitz's respect, because of her hands. Coraline stared at the brass crescent in his palm. Hank looked at the gathered town. I asked for someone to repair the schoolhouse stove. She came. Most of us only talked. Voss flushed near the back. Fitz's face tightened. Touching. It changes nothing. It changes what I know, Hank said. Coraline's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. Gideon stepped forward, voice low. Callahan, your debt is due soon. Hank closed his fingers around the key. I know, and you would make it worse? Hank looked at Coraline, then at the schoolhouse chimney, then at the people who had let winter sit in that room until a banker's daughter got on her knees. I've lived worse than owing money, he said. That evening, Coraline packed. Hank found her in the spare room folding her brown dress with careful, furious hands. Her carpet bag lay open on the bed. The tool case was already latched. He stood in the doorway. Where are you going? To Miss Bell's, if she'll have me. Why? Because your note is due, and my father will ruin you if I stay. He might ruin me if you leave. She stopped folding. He came no farther into the room. Mercer has wanted my north pasture since the railroad survey marked a possible spur. If he means to take this place, he'll find a way whether you sleep under this roof or not. That is not comfort. No, she pressed both hands on the folded dress. I will not be used as the knife. He looked at the trunk with the broken latch, the narrow bed, Anna's sewing basket still in the corner. The room seemed smaller than it had. You running to save me? He asked. I am choosing not to harm you. That sounds prettier. She turned sharply. You think I want to go? The pain in her voice crossed the room faster than a thrown cup. Hank swallowed. No, I know what men say about women who stay where they are not married. I know what they say about men with debts. I know how little truth matters once a story becomes useful. Her voice broke, and she forced it steady. You gave me shelter without asking what I was worth. I can give you the mercy of leaving. Hank stepped into the room then. One step, no more. On the bed between them lay the green coat she had worn the day she arrived, still faintly smelling of coal smoke from the schoolhouse. Stay, he said. She closed her eyes. It was not a grand word, not a proposal, not a claim. Just one syllable with all his fear laid bare beneath it. Why? She whispered. He looked down at his rough hands. Because the coffee's better. Because Bishop waits by your door. Because the school stove draws true when you turn that little brass moon. Because this house has had more breathing in it this week than in 2 years. He paused. Because I don't want you deciding alone what I can survive. She stood silent a long while. Then she took the brown dress from the carpet bag and laid it back in the drawer. Hank turned away before relief could shame them both. The storm came 3 nights later. It began with a low wind at supper, rattling the tin cup near the basin. By midnight, snow struck the windows sideways and the barn groaned under gusts. Hank rose from bed before the rooster, already pulling on his boots when a hard knock pounded the front door. Sheriff Dunn stood on the porch, beard white with snow, holding his hat against the gale. "Schoolhouse chimneys sparked," he shouted. "Bell saw smoke wrong, might be blocked." Coraline appeared behind Hank with a shawl around her shoulders. "Children? None there? But if the chimney catches, whole building goes." Hank grabbed his coat. "I'll hitch. No time for wagon," Dunn said. Roads drifted. Coraline was already reaching for her tool case. Hank turned. "You're not going." She looked at him as if he had spoken nonsense. "The stove is mine now too." They rode double through a white world. Hank on his bay gelding with Coraline behind him, her arms tight around his middle, and the tool case strapped in a grain sack at the saddle. The wind erased fence lines. Twice, the horse stumbled in drifts. By the time the schoolhouse appeared, smoke was pressing dark from under the eaves. Miss Bell stood outside in boots and a night cloak, holding a lantern that swung wildly. Caleb Price and his sister were with her, faces frightened. They saw it from their house. Miss Bell cried. Caleb ran for me. Hank jumped down and lifted Coraline after him. Smoke burned his throat as they entered. The stove glowed dull red at the belly, too hot, the pipe choking. A living coal had dropped through a seam onto the floorboards, where a black circle widened near the teacher's desk. Hank stamped it out. Coraline wrapped her hand in wool, grabbed the crescent brass key, and shut the damper halfway. "Roof," she coughed. "Pipe cap is blocked. Creosote, my bee nest. Clear it, or she'll blow smoke back through every seam." Hank seized the ladder from the side wall. "Stay outside." She was already kneeling at the stove, opening the clean-out with a wrench. "Move." There are moments when love has no time to call itself anything. It becomes a ladder held in a storm. It becomes a hand wrapped in wool against burning iron. It becomes a man climbing a frozen roof because a woman below trusts him to do what must be done. Hank climbed. The roof was slick beneath his boots. Wind tore at his coat. Snow blinded him. He reached the chimney, hooked one arm around it, and hammered the pipe cap loose with the butt of his knife. Soot and frozen debris burst upward, then vanished in the gale. Below, Coraline coughed again and shouted something he could not hear. The cap came free. The stove roared. A column of smoke shot clean from the pipe, black at first, then gray. Hank started down, but his boots slipped on ice. For one terrible second, the world tilted. His shoulders struck the roof edge. His hand caught the ladder rung, skin tearing under his glove. "Hank!" Coraline's voice cut through the storm. He found the rung with his other hand and came down hard, half falling into the snow. She was there before he could stand, hands on his coat, face white with fear and soot. "You fool," she whispered. He laughed breathlessly. "You told me to climb. I did not tell you to fall." The schoolhouse was saved by dawn. The floor was scorched, the stove shaken, the chimney cleared. Caleb Price slept on a bench under Miss Bell's cloak, exhausted from his brave run. Coraline sat near the stove with her burned palm in a basin of snow water, refusing to fuss. Hank's left hand was wrapped in a strip torn from his own shirt. Miss Bell made coffee on a trivet over the stove once the fire settled low. It tasted of smoke and tin and salvation. Hank looked at the blackened floorboard near the desk. "Anna will haunt me for that scorch." Miss Bell's eyes softened. Anna would say children can learn over a scorched board better than ashes. Coraline glanced at him. "She sounds sensible." She was. The past no longer stood between them like a closed door, more like a chair pulled close to the stove, present but not blocking the room. By morning, Mercy Ridge knew what had happened. Caleb told it with widening details until Hank had leapt from the roof like a circus man, and Coraline had held the stove together with her bare hands. The truth was strong enough without improvement. But children are natural poets. When someone saves a place they love, public feeling shifted, not all at once, but noticeably. Men nodded to Coraline in the street. Women asked her advice about smoky ovens and lamp wicks. Voss offered her a discount on stove polish, which she refused. Sheriff Dunn called her Miss Mercer, with the tone usually reserved for judges. Leander Fitch did not shift. He waited. Gideon Mercer did too. The reckoning came on a Friday afternoon under a sky bright enough to make the snow glare. Hank entered Mercer Bank with his hat in hand and his note folded in his coat pocket. He had known the day was coming. Knowing did not make the mahogany desk smaller or the ledgers less hungry. Coraline had offered to go with him. He had said no, not because he was ashamed of her, because some chains a man had to carry into the room himself before he could learn whether he would set them down. Gideon Mercer sat behind his desk. Leander Fitch stood by the window, cane in hand, looking out at Main Street as if observing livestock. "Callahan," Gideon said. Hank laid the folded paper on the desk. "I've come about the note. It is due in 32 days. I know. Then you also know extension is unlikely." Hank breathed once. "How much for release?" Gideon's brows lifted faintly. "Full payment, with interest." "I don't have it." "No." Fitch turned from the window. "There might be another solution." Hank did not look at him. Gideon opened a drawer and removed a document. "The railroad survey has made certain parcels desirable. Your north pasture, creek access, and eastern road frontage would satisfy the debt. That land keeps my cattle alive in dry months. It also keeps you indebted." Hank looked at the paper. "Transfer forms, already prepared," Fitch said. "Sign it, and you remain in your house. Refuse, and the bank proceeds properly. No one can call that cruelty." Hank stared at the ink. There was a time, not long before, when he might have signed to avoid the slow embarrassment of being taken. Pride can dress surrender as dignity when a man is tired enough. But he saw Coraline kneeling beside the school stove, saw Caleb's small hands warm around a pencil, saw Anna's shawl folded clean on the rocker, saw coffee waiting in the morning, saw a house breathing again. He lifted his eyes. "No." Gideon went still. Fitz smiled thin. No. You would lose the whole ranch rather than part with a pasture." Hank picked up his hat. "I'd rather lose what's taken honest than sign away the part that feeds what remains." Gideon leaned back. "And what do you expect Mercy to look like, Mr. Callahan?" Before Hank could answer, the bank door opened. Coraline entered carrying her wooden tool case. Behind her came Miss Bell, Sheriff Dunn, Dovie Price, Caleb's mother, and half of Mercy Ridge in a quiet line. Voss lingered near the rear, uncomfortable but present. Hank stared. "Coraline." She did not look apologetic. "You said I should not decide alone what you can survive." I agreed. "I did not agree to let you fight alone." Gideon's face darkened. "This is a private matter." "No," Coraline said. "It became public when you used debt to threaten shelter, reputation, and a schoolhouse full of children." Fitch stepped forward. "Coraline, you are making yourself ridiculous." She turned to him. "Mr. Fitch, I have repaired stoves in front of children with soot on my face. Ridiculous no longer frightens me." A whisper moved through the room. Coraline set the tool case on her father's polished desk. The brass latch clicked open. From inside she removed a packet wrapped in oilcloth and tied with blue thread. Gideon stared at it. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "Mother's papers," Coraline said. His voice dropped. "Where did you get those?" "In the trunk you never opened because it smelled like my grandfather's shop." Hank watched her untie the thread. Her hands were steady now. "My mother inherited money from her father," Coraline said, speaking not just to Gideon, but to the room. "Not Mercer money." repair shop money, coal smoke money. She placed it in trust for me before she died. Gideon rose slowly. You do not understand those documents. I understand them well enough. I asked Judge Hollis in Bismarck to read them before I boarded the train. At 26, I controlled the trust, not you. Fitz's face changed. Gideon's mouth tightened. That money was intended for your marriage settlement. It was intended for my life. She placed a bank draft on the desk. This pays Hank Callahan's note in full. Hank's breath left him. No, he said. Coraline looked at him then, and her eyes softened only for him. Yes, I won't take your mother's money. You are not taking it. I am spending it on my debt, on a ranch that feeds a school, shelters a woman without bargaining for her, and belongs to a man who would rather lose land than be owned by fear. Hank shook his head, helpless with it. Coraline, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. Let me choose what I can survive too. The room held its breath. Gideon looked from the draft to his daughter. Yes, do not expect me to protect you from consequences. Coraline's face trembled once, then steadied. I have lived too long, protected from my own choices. Fitch gave a cold laugh. And what then? You become Mrs. Callahan out of pity and soot? Hank moved before anyone else, not violently. He simply stepped in front of Coraline, placing himself between her and Fitch. You will not put pity on her name, Hank said. Fitch lifted his cane. Or, Sheriff Dunn's voice came dry from the door. I'd avoid finishing that thought. Fitch lowered the cane. Hank turned to Coraline. In front of the banker, the town, the debt, the gossip, the man who wanted to purchase her life. He took the little crescent brass stove key from his pocket. He had carried it since the churchyard and meant to return it to the school, but somehow it had stayed with him like a question. He placed it in her palm. I asked for someone to repair the schoolhouse stove, he said quietly. You repaired more than that. Her fingers closed around the brass moon. Then Hank faced Gideon Mercer. Record the payment. Gideon stood silent long enough for the clock on the wall to mark a full minute. In that minute, Hank saw not only a banker, but a widower who had polished grief until it looked like control. He saw a man who had mistaken possession for safekeeping and ledgers for love. At last, Gideon sat. He took up his pen. The scratch of it across paper sounded louder than any sermon. When it was done, Hank Callahan owned his ranch free and clear. Coraline Mercer owned her name. Leander Fitch left Mercy Ridge on the evening train with his cane, his fur collar, and no farewell worth remembering. Gideon Mercer stayed one more night. No one knew what he and Coraline said in the hotel parlor after supper. Hank did not ask. He waited outside beneath the awning, snow dripping from the eaves. Bishop sitting at his boot because the dog had followed him into town and refused to go home. When Coraline came out, her eyes were red but dry. Well? Hank asked. She looked down the street where the schoolhouse chimney smoked steady against the dusk. He said my mother would have hated the scandal. Hank's jaw tightened. I said my mother asked for a coal-smoked apron when she was dying. He waited. Coraline drew a breath. He cried then. Hank had no picture in his mind for Gideon Mercer crying. She looked at Bishop and bent to touch his head. He leaves tomorrow. He did not bless me, but he asked whether the burn on my hand was healing. That's something. Yes, she said. Not enough, but something. Spring did not come quickly to Dakota. It never does. It arrived in patches of mud, tarred creek edges, and hens remembering their duty. Snow withdrew from the fence lines. Calves dropped wet and trembling in the straw. The schoolyard turned to muck, and the children tracked half of it across Miss Bell's clean floor. Coraline stayed at the Callahan ranch, at first for the stove, then for the roof leak, then because Miss Bell needed help with arithmetic lessons after twisting her ankle, then because everyone had stopped pretending not to know. Hank did not rush her. He had learned that love, like a banked fire, could be smothered by too much handling. He made room. That was all. Room at the table, Room on the shelf for her tins of screws and stove cement. Room by the door for her green coat. Room in the morning, quiet for her to speak or not. She changed the house by inches. Curtains appeared in the kitchen, sewn from flour sacking, but edged with blue thread from Anna's old basket. The broken trunk latch was repaired. A row of beans sprouted in chip cups along the window. The blue shawl remained on the rocking chair, not as a ghost now, but as part of the room's history. Sometimes Coraline used it over her knees while reading. The first time she did, she asked Hank with her eyes. He nodded once, and that was enough. Hank changed too, though he would have denied it if pressed. He stopped eating supper standing by the stove. He fixed the porch step before it broke. He set aside the best portion of coffee for Coraline without thinking. He spoke Anna's name without drowning in it. He let Caleb Price help groom the bay gelding on Saturdays, though the boy asked more questions than a judge. One evening in April, Hank found Coraline in the schoolhouse after lessons, polishing the crescent brass stove key with a piece of wool. The stove was quiet now, its belly warm, but not roaring. Sunlight came through the windows in long gold bars. Chalk dust hung in the air. "You'll rub that moon clean away," he said. She smiled without looking up. "Then someone will have to make another. Old Abel was better with brass than I am. I know." He sat on one of the children's benches, knees too long for it, hat turning in his hands. Coraline looked over. "You came with something to say." He laughed softly. "You hear iron talk and men think? Men are usually louder." He reached into his coat pocket and removed a small object wrapped in cloth. "I made this poor enough that Abel Price might rise from his grave to correct me." She unwrapped it. Inside lay a small brass handle, crescent-shaped like the school key but rougher, thicker, with a tiny notch filed near one end. Not perfect, not polished smooth, made by hands more used to rope and reins than delicate metal. "It's for your tool case," Hank said. "The latch sticks." Coraline held it like something fragile. "I know it's not fine." Her eyes lifted to his. "It is useful." He remembered her words from that first day. Useful things can be beautiful. His voice lowered. "Coraline, I don't have a grand house. I don't have easy years promised. I have cattle that find holes in fences, a dog with no manners, a kitchen stove that smokes when the wind turns north, and a heart that took longer than it should have to notice it was still beating." She stood very still. He rose from the child's bench. "I loved Anna," he said. "I will always have loved her. I won't make that smaller to make room for you." "I would not ask that." "I know." His throat worked. "That's one of the reasons there is room." The schoolhouse held them in its warm, quiet light. He took one step closer. "I am asking if you would stay. Not because of debt, not because of gossip, not because you fixed what was broken. Stay because you want your tools on my shelf and your coffee on my stove and your name said kindly in my house." Coraline looked down at the brass handle in her palm. A tear fell onto it and made a bright spot in the dust. "My name has not always felt like mine," she said. "I'll say it until it does." She gave a small, broken laugh. Then she reached for his hand, the one that still bore a pale scar from the schoolhouse roof, and laid the brass handle in his palm before closing his fingers around it. "Yes, Hank Callahan," she said. "I will stay." They were married in June, when the prairie grass had gone green and the schoolhouse windows stood open to let in the smell of sun-warmed earth. Miss Bell stood up with Coraline. Sheriff Dunn stood with Hank and pretended the moisture in his eyes came from dust. Dovie Price baked 3 cakes, one of which sagged in the middle and was declared the best because Caleb had stirred it. Gideon Mercer came. He stood at the back of the church in a dark suit, older somehow, his hat held against his chest. He did not walk Coraline down the aisle. She walked herself, wearing a simple cream dress she had sewn with blue thread from Anna's basket. But my vows were done and the church bell rang. Gideon approached her at the door. For a moment, father and daughter looked at one another across all that money had failed to mend. Then he held out a folded cloth. Coraline opened it and saw her grandfather's sharp apron, clean but still faintly marked with old coal dust. The leather ties repaired. "I should have brought it sooner," Gideon said. Coraline pressed the apron to her heart. "Yes," she said softly. "You should have." He nodded once, accepting the wound without defense. Then Hank stepped beside her, and Gideon looked at him. "Callahan, Mr. Mercer, my daughter, dislikes cold rooms." Hank glanced at Coraline. "I have learned that." Gideon's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "See that you remember." "I will." It was not blessing. Not fully, but like Coraline had said once, it was something. That evening, the Callahan house stood with every window lit. A meal stretched across the rough table. Beans, fried potatoes, cornbread, pickled beets, roast chicken, apple preserves, and coffee kept warm on the stove. Children fell asleep in corners under coats. Bishop stole a biscuit and was forgiven by everyone except Dovey Price, who had counted them. The porch had been repaired. The fence by the road stood straight. Curtains moved softly in the summer air. On the kitchen shelf, Coraline's tool case rested beside Hank's old tobacco tin, its new brass crescent latch catching lamplight. Later, after the guests had gone and the dishes were stacked and the house settled around them, Hank found Coraline at the stove. She held the little schoolhouse key in one hand and the tool case latch in the other, comparing the two crescent moons. "Which one works better?" he asked. She pretended to study them. "This one saved a schoolhouse, and that one?" She looked toward the table, the clean curtains, the sleeping dog, the shawl on the rocker, and Hank standing in shirt sleeves with his heart finally unguarded. "This one saved a home," she said. Outside, the Dakota wind moved through the cottonwoods, gentler than it had been in winter. The schoolhouse stove would need tending again someday. So would the fences, the roof, the cattle, the garden, and every human heart under that roof. But there was coffee waiting now. There was bread cooling beneath a cloth. There were tools where hands could find them. And when the night grew cold, no one in that house had to warm themselves alone.